Hello and welcome to this WFA webcast on how food and agribusiness leaders have addressed COVID-19 challenges. I'm Olivia Midgley and I'm the news editor of Farmers Guardian, which is a weekly agricultural magazine published by AgriBriefing here in the UK. We pre-recorded this webcast earlier this week, but our speakers are online right now to take questions in the Q&A chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you post a question in the questions tab, our speakers will be able to type your response, so please ask away throughout the webcast. We'll also be releasing a number of polls throughout the 40 minutes, so if you want to share your opinions and see what others in the industry are thinking, then please do participate in these. Now, with us to answer the big questions on how the sector has coped and is continuing to cope with the unprecedented challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic, I'm pleased to say we have with us two very well-versed panelists. Jacqueline Pieters, who is the Finance and Investment Lead at the World Business Council of Sustainable Development and has worked at Rabobank for 28 years. And we've got Dr. Mark Lyons, who's the President and Chief Executive of Alltech. Jacqueline, just by way of introduction, can you tell us about your business and the brief that you cover there?
Good. Well, thank you very much. Very privileged to be here, first of all. My name is Jacqueline Pieters. I've been working for Rabobank for 28 years, and let's go focus first on that. Rabobank is a food and agri bank, a global food and agri bank. In the Netherlands, it's one of the major banks there, not only on food and agri, but also on every other aspect of a bank. We do have an exposure of 100 billion outstanding in food and agri global. In my last position within Rabobank, I was a global head banking for food, which included the innovation, helping our clients to innovate. It was the research. We have 90 research analysts in the global base. It was the partnerships with the multilateral organizations, and it was the strategy. And at that time, I really loved, I've been an investment banker for 28 years, but I wanted to be a little bit more and to be focusing more on sustainability. So on my request, I am now seconded to the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, which is located in Geneva. And that's a CEO-led organization containing the 200 biggest companies or main companies in the world who said, we want to jointly stimulate, accelerate the sustainable development goals as defined by the United Nations. The WBCSD, it's an abbreviation, is now working on a Vision 2050, what has to be done to really achieve the sustainability goals as we have agreed upon. And I'm looking very much into the finance and investment on how can finance and investment be an accelerator to indeed driving those sustainable development goals.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jacqueline. And Mark, can you just introduce yourself, please?
I'm Dr. Mark Lyons, President and CEO of Alltech. Alltech is a family business founded by my parents, led by my father. For a number of years, he really built a global business. And I think that's one of the elements that's truly unique. We operate in over 90 countries. We sell products in over 120. And so through this pandemic, we've had an interesting way of being able to see what's taking place around the world and really learn from different experiences, the way different cultures have responded. Alltech is very much focused on animal health and nutrition, also crop health and nutrition. And we also have a beverage division, which you can see a little bit of here, which is really a nice connection to the family legacy. I represent the 7th generation of our family involved in the alcohol industry. And so that part of the business really tells the story. It tells the story of fermentation, which is the core of everything we do, the science, which is really what drives our innovations and how we can get those out to market. So it's a great honor to be here today and again, be connected with Women in Food and Ag.
These have been unprecedented times, but the food and agriculture sectors have really risen to the challenges of COVID-19 and adapted the business models. We've seen some great stories here in the UK of businesses literally turning on a sixpence and meeting changing demand. And we've seen the likes of John Deere using its factories to manufacture personal protective equipment for hospital workers. We've also seen farmers and processors diverting food which would have normally gone into retail, to the food service sector, going straight into retail, and to satisfy what has just been extraordinary high demand for British meat and other fresh produce. I'm sure that's something that has been seen probably globally. I know UK supermarkets have had, I think they had 5 consecutive days of trading with higher sales than they did just before Christmas on the 23rd of December, which is just astonishing, really. So I know the retailers have certainly been the winners here, as they probably have been across the world. But I think just the changes that we've seen as an industry in the last 3 months and how the sector's adapted to this new normal is just incredible, really. I mean, Jacqueline, just to start with you, how do you think companies in food and agriculture have coped with the pandemic? Just as a big question.
Yeah, it's a very big question. Well, thank you very much. I think generally, I mean, what you're referring to is a symbol of the flexibility of the sector. I think generally food and agribusiness is used to hiccups. I mean, this is a major hiccup, of course, but we are used because of the seasonality, because of sometimes you have drought, sometimes you have rain, sometimes you have. So generally, food companies are used to the fact that there are barriers where you suddenly have to change your sourcing or your markets generally. And I think that is generally, you see, it's overwhelming how well it went. I think it also has to do with the fact that generally there is a little disruption in the trade restrictions. If you look into another very serious crisis, was in 2008, where it was immediately much more trade restrictions. So I think that was a good thing that happened less this time than last time. So generally, I think it's going well. But I do think there is a lot of also disruption. Especially you refer to the high demand in vegetables and in the UK. But at the same time, you see also a huge disruption, especially in the perishables. If you look, for example, in the Netherlands, we are the second exporter globally from food and agribusiness. So you can imagine the amount of potatoes and vegetables and flowers will have to be exported. And suddenly demand was gone. So there was a huge disruption there. The same you see in several countries, like in India, where you see 50% of the demand of grapes was gone overnight. 30% of the farm gate prices of bananas. And for example, in Kenya, 70% of the flights were gone or were not there. And most of the perishables coming from Kenya go by airplane. You can discuss about how sustainable that is, but that is the fact. And so you do see, especially in those countries, there was a huge disruption. And I think the last thing I would like to mention is you mentioned also meat. But there is a disruption, not so much in demand, but especially in the chain, where you see the closure of meat plants starting in the US, currently now also all around the Tonys in Germany. You see disruption in the chain itself, and that not refers only to the plant, but of course also to what happens on the farms, because you can't ask pigs not to stop growing, as we all know. So it has a disruption there. And maybe its last one is something that's living in Western Europe, living in the Netherlands, you sometimes forget, but the vulnerability of countries who have an import dependence. Like you see, for example, in Africa. And if you do that together with a depreciation of currency, it's going to have a real impact also in the food security. So those are things, yes. So conclusion, I think the food industry has reacted extremely well. At the same time, you see in specific sectors and also areas major disruptions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the points you make there, and especially on meat processing plants, because here in the UK, in the last few days, we've seen 3 plants just in Wales alone go down because, obviously employees have been taken ill. We've seen the same thing, as you say, in Germany, and also the US as well has just seen horrendous problems. And yeah, it's just such a worrying time, isn't it? But I think it, like you say, it just highlights the kind of fragility of sectors, and also bringing in those elements of food security as well, doesn't it? And making sure that we are food secure as nations, really. Mark, I just wondered how, your take on that. How do you think that companies have coped with the pandemic?
Sure. I think if we start from the farm gate, perhaps, I think that's been the part that we found the most inspiring. People who have continued to do what they do every day, what they've always done, producing food that ultimately ends up on our plates, ends up on our store shelves. And I think that's been quite inspiring, really, to see that commitment when many other industries really were crippled. Had totally, stopped in terms of their ability to sell products and ability to service their customers. Agriculture continued. Having said that, of course, we're seeing other challenges. And it's been interesting to me because across the board, talking to friends in other sectors, we've often discussed how you really saw in these moments of crisis the best and the worst. And I think that some companies anticipated truancy. They anticipated people not showing up to work out of fear. And I think what we've actually seen through this process is that people did show up and they had a renewed sense of purpose and importance of their job. And I've heard that around the world, talking to customers, talking to our colleagues, how keeping operational has been such a critical element in terms of our sector. And so I think that aspect has been tremendous. However, I think that when we dig into this a little bit more, so many countries, the food sector was designated as essential. And a really important message that I have seen is companies that responded to that to say, essential, yes, which means we must continue to operate, but doesn't mean business as usual. And in other areas, I think people have said, we're essential, we've got to go to work. People should continue to follow the same procedures that they did in the past. And I think those have been some of the areas that have really been of concern. So this area of the focus of the industry, constantly looking at efficiency, constantly looking at a way that we can produce food at a lower price, I think is again being called into real question here. Because if we were not thinking just of that, would we have the ability to respond? Would we have the real ability to be more flexible? And you're really seeing an appreciation, I think, from the consumer, not just of the food sector in general, but particularly of local food. And so this is a big trend that we need to watch. Does this suddenly shift things in terms of our supply chains? And how we go forward. So for me, it's been a situation, and I think we see this over and over, whether it's economies, whether it's businesses, that those with underlying conditions, same as we find in the human population, are being much more affected by the pandemic. And that's also, I think, what I would share with Jacqueline, a concern, particularly around emerging markets, developing markets. How are they going to come through this? Are they going to face potentially a lost decade where they could have had, a lot of the gains that some of these great markets have had throughout Latin America, throughout Asia, throughout Africa, of GDP growth? Is that being wiped away in a few months, particularly where food insecurity is present? So that's got to be a big focus for all of us going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, you just mentioned the wider issue of supply chains there, Mark. I mean, how can you see supply chains manoeuvring and changing following this pandemic? Do you think, some people have been calling it sort of a reset moment, haven't they? Do you think that, that the entire supply chain is going to really take a root and branch look at their supply chains and maybe how they can change and make themselves more efficient?
Yeah, I think that suddenly, when you think of the priorities that we all have, all the types of things we want, certainly we want quality. We've often said we want sustainability or we want provenance. These are things that are important, but just the confidence of having a supplier that is going to deliver for you suddenly shot up on the list, and having somebody that you knew you could count on. And so, my father, those of the viewers that knew him, he often did things and thought of things and directed our company in ways that we didn't all understand. And one of the things he always drove forward was, as soon as we have an office, as soon as we have a team that's building in a market, let's put in local production. And that local production might have only represented 10 or 20% of our production, but it was there. And we've really found that has been a massive strategic advantage for us, having so many abilities to respond and be flexible, and having that flexibility and that speed built into our system has really been a competitive advantage. Where is the most efficient in the best of times? Perhaps not. Maybe having a mega facility would be better. But I think we're seeing supply chains having to think that same way. We're hearing a lot about regionalization. Are we going to be sourcing from countries that we have a strong relationship with and trust? And we've already seen this. I spent 6 years living in China, and China sources from countries that it trusts and that it has a strong relationship with. And I think we're going to see that continue. During our one virtual experience last month, I had a great conversation with economist David McWilliams, and together we kind of coined a new idea, which was relationship economics. And is this something where if we don't have a relationship, if we don't have trust, that issue is going to trump perhaps some issues around price, and the price is no longer going to be the driver. It's going to be trust. And so I think that every single company, but also a lot of nation states are now looking at this issue and saying, we have to have a secure food supply, and we're going to be getting that food from people that we trust.
Yeah, that's such a nice way of putting it, isn't it? Trust is huge, isn't it? Especially with anything to do with food as well. Jacqueline, what do you think? Your thoughts really on supply chains. How do you think that supply chains might use this pandemic as a real learning exercise and actually to better themselves in the future?
Well, I agree with many things that Mark said about. There is also internally, but also with clients, quite a discussion on export dependence and local the local for local trade. And I'm personally also of the opinion, I think organization as well, is that you probably need both. Yes, you need to have a resilience of also the local production. I think it's not only resilience, I think it's also good to have and to show people where the product comes from. I recently heard a story about a class of schoolers who went to the farm, and after their visits, they didn't want to eat eggs because they, during their visit, that the egg came from the behind of a chicken. We are so far away from production of food. So therefore, I think it's also important to source more locally. But at the same time, you also have to look into, sometimes it's better to produce it internationally, to produce on another part of the world. Also because of sustainable reasons it can be. So in my opinion, it will often be a combination of local production when possible, produce locally when possible, but also include the international trade. That's one thing. The other thing is also on consumers. Do you have to eat strawberries in wintertime? The question is also, do you need everything all the time? Is it also sometimes okay to have not something, a specific one? That's something we're not used to, but I think people also found during the COVID and during now that there are alternatives. And maybe you have to change your mind and do something alternative. I think that's something that is interesting. Hopefully, it will remain there. Discussion very much also what Mark was saying is the efficiency. We're so focused on just in time, so there is little resilience in any disruption. And maybe we should look into just in case. Just in case. And it can be of indeed having more, or keeping more products in your own country. But you can indeed think also of increasing resilience by partnerships, by having options, from the sourcing side, but maybe also from the distribution side. Because a major point now we have, especially was on the distribution side, because all the out of homes were not the distribution that you could not sell to them. And what I've seen is also that we as a bank, we have stimulated very much also and helped our clients in creating new distribution channels by the local for local. We call it farmers for neighbors. And I think that is something that I hope will remain. But the last thing, what I think that is have to look more into is also in the working force. Because of the seasonality of production of food, we are often dependent on people who are working temporary, and often those are coming from countries outside, live here in small housing, traveling together, and you see that now in the meat industry happening. But we also saw it, for example, in the Netherlands in the greenhousing, major discussions on how to overcome it, how to be. We're very dependent on the temporary workers. So people are talking now of increasing robotization, which is fine, but at the same time, are there going to be enough jobs for everybody then afterwards? So there's a lot of discussion, and I think it's good to take a broader perspective than just looking into efficiency. Yes, things has to be efficient, but maybe things should be more just in case. So that's my answer.
I think you're right, and I think actually in the UK, what we saw, you may have seen it in your own countries as well, but the panic buying that ensued in March. People, as you say, people just haven't been used to not being able to access the things that they want in terms of food and drink. And I think what it did do, it did push people to, like you say, try new things perhaps that they wouldn't have necessarily bought in the past. And I was talking to one farmer who's got a really successful farm shop in the southeast of England, and he was saying that his farm shop, it was just absolutely bustling with customers. And I said, how did you manage to keep it stocked? And he said, well, that's the beauty of local short supply chains, because if local producers know that something is in demand, it's quite surprising how quickly they can make sure that you've got that to sell. So I think that's a real success story actually of this whole thing. It's quite nice. I mean, for you two, what have been the biggest challenges for your own businesses? Mark, do you want to start? So
sure.
How Alltech's seen it?
Yeah, I think Jacqueline's looking at a lot of businesses and sectors. For our business, we were very fortunate in the fact that we already had a risk management group, and that group is constantly looking at different issues that come up within our business across the globe, assessing those risks. And of course, when COVID kicked off, we were monitoring this, saw the disruption. We have a production facility in Tianjin, about an hour and a half outside of Beijing. And in my time there, it had obviously a lot of connection with the team and knew them very well. And so when things really started to move, and we were looking at a situation post Chinese New Year Spring Festival of a shutdown, we were able to pick up on that quickly. And that risk group mobilized. We created a task force within China to be able to manage the situation and really use that as a template and rolled that out around the globe. And that group has really learned from each other. And now as we look to return to work in some locations, we're doing so slowly and very conservatively. But at the same time, it's fascinating to think, what one team is learning from another. In only perhaps a way that the Japanese could. An issue that came up was, if I'm in the office and we need to social distance, and somebody's in the office or in a meeting room and they're leaving, who has the right of way when these two people meet? Just things I don't think we would have ever thought about, all sorts of issues and ideas that have come together as the teams put those plans in place. So I've been able to, as a CEO, it's been a really interesting moment. I think that the challenge perhaps that most of us have faced is if we're working from home or we're in this setting, many of us are working globally anyway. It's always been kind of a bit of a 24-hour job, but this really, I think, took that to another level. And as I've talked to a lot of CEOs and talked to a lot of our customers right now, the visibility of the CEO and the role of the CEO and the importance of that role has become even greater. Through virtual technology, I would say today, all of my colleagues don't expect to see me once a week. They expect to see me probably multiple times a week. Because we're getting on calls with each of the regions, trying to keep the team motivated and connected, and that connectivity has been tremendous. But that also does create challenges, and I think there is a question perhaps on we'll maybe get into more around sustainability in a little bit. But I think when you think of a broader, real broad sense of sustainability, is that level of connectivity and that level of endurance, I suppose, for a core group of people that are really leading the charge, is that something that is truly able to be sustained over the long term? So I think that importance where you're moving from being responsible for people's livelihoods and certainly the business results and those types of things, to being responsible for their health and well-being and their family's health and well-being. That's a different weight for leaders to take on, and I think that's been a real test of character for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's just something we've never seen before or had to deal with, is it? It's just a completely new challenge for us all. Jacqueline, how are you guys faring at Rabobank? Is there anything that you'll change going forward?
Well, maybe go in first in what were the biggest challenges, because I think that also refers very much what is the way forward? The biggest challenge was, I think, three things. Clients, I would say 3 times clients, but clients, employees, and the whole banking structure and portfolio. And I think first of our challenge was very much, okay, how to keep our clients fit, how to assure that indeed create flexibility in their financing, how to assure that we can provide finance and remain finance, but also can provide knowledge and networks. Because we found out that knowledge, especially in the early start, it's so difficult. Where do you find knowledge? What is happening? What are best practices? And that's something that we've been doing as a bank for a long time, but specifically here now also during COVID-19. Not as only, also World Business Council Sustainable Development is very, very active in sharing best practices, connecting people. Because that's the other thing on knowledge is also networks. How to, Mark was referring to that as well, is how to assure that you can keep on, get the resources needed, that you can keep on your market, etc. And that's what we've been doing as far as we were able to, of course, but connecting the people, the right people. If there was an over amount of something, how to get rid of that or how to sell it in the best way. So that's about clients. Other thing is, as Mark referring to, is we have 48,000 employees. Suddenly all at home, and at the same time you're working with very secured systems. And how do you do that? I mean, our system was used, I think, for 3,000 people could work at home, and now there are 48. Of course, there was a small part of the people who had to be there because of the financial system, because of the capital markets. So that was a major thing. And I'm very proud, and also, I think generally, impressed by the financial sector that it could remain going on. I mean, there was no day, as far as I remember, that I couldn't get any money. Well, the thing is, for everything is digital, so but I think that remained on. And the last one is portfolio, with an exposure of 100 million is very much, or 100 billion, is where are the risks? And I think that is something also, where are the risks and how to increase resilience with our clients. And I think that is very much also the way forward, is to help our clients to become more resilient and also to be better fit for the future. And this is something that we already started before the COVID-19, where we said, well, what are the major key transitions for our clients for the coming 5 years? And we identified at that time, and that was last year, 3 or 4 to be honest, was a reduction of carbon emission. It was the improvement of quality of water and soil. It was the increase of digitalization, and the 5th one was the reduction of waste. And I think that COVID is only very much stimulating those key transitions. Though at the same time, I noticed that people are very much in the surviving mode at this moment, saying, well, we have to survive for the coming month, we have to survive. But if you take a little longer view, I think the key transitions are still there, and probably even on a more important, higher level than they were before. Because people realize now that things that we've been discussing, the black swans that we have been discussing, like pandemics, is not a black swan. I mean, it's something that happens. Climate change is happening. I mean, it's not when or if, it's only when. So, and I think that is very much what we are also in the way forward, is how can we help our clients to adapt better to the new situation? That's one thing, with finance, with networks, and with knowledge. And also, how can we assure our own portfolio to make it more resilient? So I think it's a win-win in that respect. The only thing is, of course, if we focus only on efficiency, that is going to be difficult. If we only focus on the cost at this moment, that is going to be, so you have to take a longer run. You have to have a longer view on what's happening and how does it affect you as a company. And that refers to our clients as well as to Rabobank itself.
And you've just mentioned climate change there, and I mean, I suppose it nicely brings us into the whole sustainability piece and environmental concerns. We did some research before the outbreak, and we spoke to women across the food and agricultural industries, and they told us that sustainability and the environmental impact of the sector was top of their agendas. Do you think this is still a focus for us, or should our industry be looking at different priorities, or is it a case of we need to look at a range of things? Mark, do you want to start on that one?
I actually would say this has sped things up. I think Jacqueline's spot on. I think some of those technologies, whether it's digital, whether it's local, whether it's provenance, the story, all of these things, it's speeding all of that up. We are seeing an incredible shift in terms of living in this virtual world, the connectivity and the share of voice that is represented. And so I think younger voices, people who are using technology, we're hearing a lot more from them. And so you've really got an inverted pyramid moment, I think, here, where those types of issues and those segments of the population that truly believe that these are critical things, such as sustainability, such as environmental care, and also taking care of your society, I think these things mean a lot more. Now, having said that, I think that there's also an element of how do we get the right facts and the right details out there. In looking perhaps here in North America at some of the disruption that's happening on a societal level, where of course we have people the most impacted probably are the ones in the most fragile economic situation. We have to think about supply chains, and we need to think about how we produce our food, who we employ, how we employ them, and the quality of work that they have. And so when we step back and look at the commitment we made as well on the Sustainable Development Goals about a year ago, one of them was, that good work and economic growth focus. And when I was thinking about that at the time, I was thinking a lot about, some of the communities that we are a major employer in rural communities in often developing countries. But that, I think, is starting to mean even more right now. And we've got to be thinking about how are we providing societal benefit as organizations. And I think that's going to shift the way we think about some of the products. Some of the products that a lot of startups are creating, I think a lot of the plant-based products are very hot, very high on the sustainability indexes, but they don't answer that societal question. Actually, to a large degree, they disrupt a lot of rural communities and really rural livelihoods, which is a critical area in so many countries where we have some of the poorest people and some of the people who really need to see some of that money come back to the farm gate. And we're saying we're going to put them out of business. So I think it's really shaking up the way we think about sustainability. I think that the sense of having enough on your plate and knowing that when you go to the store, you don't need to hoard is starting to make us think differently. And I think we've really got to dig in at this moment and make sure that we are thinking as broadly and with this new black swan moment of a pandemic, as Jacqueline was mentioning, realizing this is part of a reality, and we need to think of all of the stakeholders that are involved.
And Jacqueline, just on that, is there anything else on the kind of sustainability and the environmental priorities that you think we should really be focusing on now?
Well, I'm positive and negative on the whole environmental thing. Okay, let's start with the negative. My fear is that people will look at it in the short term. How to fix it now? I mean, we have quite some discussions, for example, with just an example on the airplane, the air flights, how to subsidize or support them. But this would also be a good moment to think about, but how do we want to have how should we act in the next level there? So my fears a little bit is, are we going to focus very much on the short term? I hope not, because I think it's essential for the longer term to be fit there. So focusing on positive, I think that the companies indeed will increase their focus on resilience. That's one thing, because we notice there is a risk. And also from a financial point of view, there is a risk if you don't have an answer for things happening like this. So there is going to be change, in my opinion, with regard to how to look and calculate and take the risk into your models. That's one thing. And that includes also an improvement or a recognition of the value of climate, nature, and equality. And I just on a few things that I'm currently writing a paper with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development specifically on how can finance and investment be an enabler to stimulate sustainability goals. And that is really referring to the climate, nature, and the equality. And what a major point is that yes, we want to be more sustainable, but the thing is there is hardly any value recognized towards the externalities. So if you ask people to produce more sustainable, to adapt their agricultural process, who's going to pay for it? Because up to now, it was very difficult for clients, first of all, because not always they knew about it or could really recognize, because there was little transparency in it. It was also that the reduction of carbon emission was, well, sort of free, isn't it? And that is a major point, is how are we going to address that? How are we going to recognize the value of externalities that they haven't recognized yet? And that's going to be partly indeed the increased cost of risk, probably. The increased cost of risk. It's going to probably a combination of the models that we use not the backward-looking models, but the forward-looking models. And thirdly, is probably that we should give it a value. And I'm not only talking about maybe putting a price on it, but maybe you can also think of restricting it, or putting a tax on it. There's a very interesting research done on tax, how to help, the tax can help it. It's called X tax, where the natural sourcing and pollutions are taxed, while reduction of tax of labor. So not increasing tax, but changing it. But it's very much, so we want to do the right thing. We want to do the increase and improve sustainability. But in the end, if there's no value to it, it's very difficult. And the last thing I would like to say is that Mark was also referring to it. It is also, what do we want? What as a CEO do we want to achieve? And how do we want to be seen? Because it's not only about making the money, but indeed also what are my stakeholders? Is it only the shareholder that I'm looking for? Is that the only one that I'm producing for or making the profit for? Or is it a broader responsibility? And am I really going to take it even in times when it's difficult? So that is I think the future. So I'm very positive. We have to take the short-term focus on, okay, how to overcome the hurdle of remaining alive, and physically, but also as a company. But let's keep also the longer-term view, indeed. But I think that value recognition of externalities is going to be essential.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And we'll have to wrap up shortly, but I just want to know, what's the biggest thing that you've learned from this whole pandemic? Mark, do you want to start with that one?
We were talking the other week about kind of the moment we're in, and I think out of our one conference, there was a couple of big thoughts that came out. One was our Friday talk, our wrap-up keynote was Professor Frank Mitloehner of University, UC Davis. And he gave a great talk and really honed in on one idea, which was that we shouldn't be talking about carbon neutrality, we should be talking about climate neutrality. And that actually, when we look back and we think about agriculture, we think about our food, and I've always thought about it in a sense, where do you want to spend your greenhouse gases? In a way, it should be for food. And food, of course, is one of the original, if not the original industry. This industry is dynamic, it's changed, it's adapted through this time. And the other thought that came through was actually a Martin Luther King quote. And the quote is a fantastic one to look up, but the core of it is this fierce urgency of now. And I think the reality is agriculture has an extraordinary moment right now to step out in front, to lead the way out of COVID, to think we don't have to rebuild it the way it was. We can rebuild it in a new way. And we can really embrace some of these concepts that are coming out, really embrace this broader essence of sustainability and become a leader in the global economy, not always the industry perhaps that's on the back foot responding. And I think that has been the big message for us. That's been the big motivation. I've seen so much energy within our colleagues and our team being motivated by this and really connecting with our customers. So that mission that we've been on of Planet of Plenty is kind of really, in Chinese, they say, Jiao, add oil. Like we've added all the oil to this. The fire is burning in our people. And it's been extraordinarily motivating, and they're really wanting to get out there. And then, of course, we're having to put the brakes on a bit and say, look, we got to be safe We have to stay committed to our customers, our colleagues, and our communities, which has been the mantra that we've had from the core, from the beginning of the business, or beginning of this time of COVID. And so, at the same time, I think it's going to be a moment right now that 2020 has to be the year that agriculture, I think, looks itself in the mirror and says, who do we want to be? And I think that's the excitement that we've seen from this time.
Excellent. Yeah, I think capitalizing on the success that we've seen across the industry throughout this time, it's a real moment, isn't it, to capture that. Jacqueline, for you, what's the biggest thing that you've learned from this whole pandemic?
That we can act, and that we can act jointly if we really want. I think that was a major takeaway for me, that we are really, and that is private sector, public sector, individuals, everybody are really willing to act when there is something happening like this. And I really hope that also that we're going to act so jointly together with regard to nature and climate, and hopefully also equality. So that's one thing that I really enjoyed, but also realized, why didn't we do anything else before? That's the other one. I very much agree with Mark, is that I think with regard to food, it's the flexibility that we see. And I think that food and agribusiness is very, very well positioned with regard to climate change. It's not only reducing of carbon emission, but also sequestration of carbon. I think it's the only sector who can really do that on a global base. So if we can get a sort of value there, I think also, it can be also an additional income for the food and agribusiness. So that is one. I had a third one, which I can't remember now, but I'm very interested in how this is going to happen for the longer term. The governments are making huge investments, and what is going to be the impact? But I'm glad that we were willing and able to act as fast as we did, and especially proud on the food and agribusiness.
Yeah, I think agribusiness, as you just said there, it's just well placed, isn't it, to deliver on the goals, not only to help keep people fed, but also to be part of the solution as well, as we move, as we try and find climate change solutions and just greater sustainability in general. Well, thanks so much to you both. I found that really insightful, and thank you for your in-depth discussion and for speaking as well so candidly about your own businesses. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you to you as well, to everyone who tuned in. But if you want to see more insight like this and discussions, you can sign up to the WFA community, which you'll find on LinkedIn. And you can also keep up to date with all the future webcasts and videos. You can also visit our website, wfasummit.com. Until next time, thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon.